Mike, tell us a little bit about when you knew you were different than other boys.
I was attracted to men, but I wasn't dating girls either. I just was my geeky self and ignored those feelings until I got to college. I said, all right, well, look, I might be attracted to men, but I'm going to date women because it was the Reagan era, the AIDS epidemic, the, blaming, gays for not only their behaviors, but for the diseases. And it's like, who wants to choose that lifestyle? And so I dated women. I dated women for my 4 years in college. I did have an affair with a man while I was in college, and that affirmed for me that my attraction was real. Unlike some gays, I wasn't repulsed by women, so I found a path to say, all right, I'm going to live it. I'm going to do this the straight way. We graduated college. I got married at 22. And look, I grew up in New York City, right? There was plenty of gay men in my circle of friends, my family, my extended family. I didn't know anyone who was gay. Gay men, many gay men didn't come out back then. And while we were a relatively liberal family, I was raised Jewish. There was nothing about gay being evil. Nobody came out as gay. And so I didn't have those role models. All I knew was the gay life was hard. You saw the news about gay men dying of AIDS, and it was like, no, that's not the life I want for myself. And I'm going to do it the way everybody else I know does it. And I'm going
Yeah.
to, date the woman and get engaged to the woman and marry the woman and have kids and, make my parents and my grandparents proud. It was during the course of the marriage that I realized what I had done. The advent of the internet, right? The commercialization of the internet, even with just dial-up modems where you can dial up to these online bulletin boards and start to, I guess we call the BBSs, right? The bulletin board services, where you can find like-minded people. And then the dial-up services like the Prodigy, the AOL chat rooms, right? A very historic for closeted, discreet married men to meet one another and have conversations with one another. It wasn't really until midway through my marriage that I realized what I had done to myself and of course what I had done to my wife.
So, how did you come out to your wife? Or I guess, in a sense, we could say you were kind of found out by your wife.
Neither one of us had really worked from home at the time. I guess I worked from home more frequently. My wife was in education, so she spent most of her time in schools and centers. So this was the first time that we were really together, all day long and all evening long and 7 days a week. One day early in the pandemic, I happened to have my phone with me while I was making lunch upstairs. My home office was in the basement. Her home office was off the kitchen. I had one of my uh, gay chat apps open, and I went to make lunch, and I forgot I left my phone out there in the open, and she saw it and asked me about it, and I was kind of forced to reconcile what to do, right? There were a couple of times in our marriage where she had suspicions, but they were easily dispelled. But here she was with the evidence in her hand. And I made the decision at that point to, I don't know, be brave, be vulnerable. And I told her. The therapist, who was a very good therapist, but was having trouble breaking through to me being okay, being vulnerable. What he and my wife didn't know at the time was, well, because I had built up these walls around my emotions, around myself to protect my secret. And so he tried whatever he could to get me to be vulnerable, and I couldn't. And it was at that moment that, with her holding my phone with the Grinder app open, that I realized it was the time to be courageous and let myself be vulnerable.
How did she respond?
Sadness, anger. How could you do this to me? Why'd you keep a secret from me? I know it, in hindsight, there was some empathy in there. It's like, oh man, how could you be going through this? And we were friends, right? We weren't just, husband and wife, we were friends. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure she was feeling at that moment a lot of emotions, but she was just plain out hurt.
So, talk a little bit more from your coming out to your wife, coming out to your kids. Tell us a little bit about how that transpired, Mike.
It was very methodical. In hindsight, I can say it's methodical. I don't know. It didn't feel very controlled
Didn't
at the
feel that way
moment.
at the time.
But I agreed to go into therapy. And given that we were in the pandemic, therapists were working virtual, and so I was able to pick and choose a therapist who was had experience in the space that I was feeling I was in at that moment. I went into therapy to try to to get over the shame, to get over the guilt, to be comfortable with knowing what my identity was, and to put together a plan for how to move forward. And it took me about 6 months to get there, and made it clear to knew that I wanted to be with men. My wife and I have both have relatively traditional values, and so the marriage didn't really allow room for me exploring my sexuality given that core value, and so we decided to separate. We decided to separate to tell the kids that there were some, potentially some irreconcilable differences. We didn't tell them what it was. And it was good. It was a good time in the real estate market to sell the house, which is what we were planning to do anyhow at that stage of our life. So we told the kids about, and our families about the fact that we were separating, and we sold the house and we each moved into our own place.
Let me ask you a question because I think this is important for my audience to understand. When you came out with when your wife confronted you and you finally admitted to yourself that you were gay, did you have any sense of peace at that time that that you were really telling the first person who you authentically were? Was there any sense of peace?
I was grateful for the fact that my secret of nearly 60 years, well, I mean, let's just say 40 years of adult life, was out. Um, Secrets are an awful thing, right? And there was a great sense of relief. There was also a sense of excitement. It's like, all right, well, what's next for me? But it was also overwhelmed by fear, right? So we think about it. I'm giving up everything I knew, right? We were at the point of our lives where we were planning retirement. And so, you're thinking about that final chapter, not starting a new book. And one can only project to say, this isn't going to end well for me. I'm in business for myself, and so I'm self-employed. And so if my business tanks and I can't care for myself and I don't have a wife to care for me anymore, and we're splitting all our retirement savings, so how long is that going to last for me? And oh, by the way, I'm going to get sick and there's going to be no one to care for me. So I had this vision of myself in this horrible place of in a dimly lit room with a light bulb swinging from the ceiling off of some electrical cord, barely any furniture, just dying alone. And it was there was some pretty fearful moments.
Most of our fears, and usually almost all of them, really never come true. But in our mind at the time, they're true. Okay. Uh, Tell me what your fear was about what you did. You talked about losing your family. Uh, you had a tremendous amount of fear. Out of all the fear that you just mentioned, how much of it came true?
None of it. None of it. And that's true of, look, I do leadership development. I do coaching as part of my business practice. And so I know what fears do to us, but I also know that almost never do our fears come true. They are not based upon data. Often they're based upon emotion. Fear is an emotion, and an emotion surrounding something that's likely never to happen. And that's another point where it's important to be courageous, right? To understand those fears. So, and by the way, my fears were compounded by the fact that I joined all of these online groups for men going through my situation. So, how husbands out to wives, Gamma for gay men who are in a married or committed relationship with a woman. And so I got a ton of peer support, and I could have not done this without that peer support. But I also heard all the horror stories of men who had gone through this process or were going through this process a little bit ahead of me, and some of the challenges that they were facing. While the peer support group helped me overcome my fears, they also created fears in me. It's like, oh, what if that happens? And what if my kids never talk to me? And what if I lose my job, or my community shuns me, or I can't afford to retire? Um, I saw so many different things happen to so many different men that my eyes being opened, it just compounded the fears, because I got enough inspiration from seeing those who had been on the other side of the process and they had happier lives. I got the accountability, the support and the accountability I needed to take that one step at a time through this journey. And I got to see my eyes became opened to all the possibilities that are out there, that, having been raised with such heteronormative values, that looking at a gay community of men who had followed and, whose journey I was following in, I was able to see that there's not just one way to do it. And so it opened my eyes to possibilities that I hadn't considered before, because of all that programming and scripting that I had developed over the decades.
And I think what I realized, because I've been a part of Gamma now 2 years, which I think is an incredible organization. In fact, we did a interview with Harry Fox, who's one of the facilitators of Gamma. Of course, I'm in a beautiful relationship. I've been happier than I've ever been in my whole life. I have a great partner. So I try to be an encouragement through Gamma with my story, as all of us try to do, to be that as well. But I think there is similarities in our story, but each of our stories is unique. It's unique to us. Yeah. And so we've got to understand that the stories can be encouraging, but there's going to be some stories on there that may not be discouraging for our unique life. Does that make sense? But I want to talk about how you came out to your son and your daughter. Tell us how that happened, Mike.
Yeah, my son is older. He's 31 today. Then my daughter's 29. He lives in Florida. He's a teacher down there. He moved to a very conservative county with a very conservative community, and he took a job with very conservative leadership, and it was all very comfortable for him, and that's how he identified. I was really nervous about coming out to him because, well, how much more progressive can your dad divorcing your mom to come out as gay be? And I was worried that maybe he wouldn't accept me, or I was worried that he may not get the support from his community.
Oh, okay.
As he was going through his dad coming out. And so I flew down to visit him in Florida, and I stayed at an Airbnb, and I came to his house one night on a Wednesday to tell him, and I chickened out. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Wednesday happened to be the Philly Gamma meeting, so I went back to my Airbnb and got on the Gamma meeting, and the guys were there, and they were very supportive and very encouraging, and it gave me the confidence. It helped me build my courage to go back the next night and do it. And at that point, his mom and I, my wife and I, had been separated for I don't know, 8 months maybe. He just didn't know why. It was irreconcilable differences. So I explained to him why. He says, I kind of get it now. And they said something to me that struck me. He said, first he said, it's okay with him, right? And that was a little sigh of relief. And then he said, he wished I had done this sooner in life, because for the past year, I've been so much easier to be around. So it was a very emotional moment for me. And, later that night when I drove back to my Airbnb, I was in tears for a half hour, kind of relieved and also really happy. I'm really happy and really encouraged. None of my relationships have been authentic because I haven't been authentic. And I began to be encouraged by the fact that the relationships in my life will be better now because of this step that I had taken, how far I've come along that journey thus far. And I've come a lot farther since then. But it was those moments of validation that, hey, this could be working,
Mhm.
that encourages you to sort of to remain vulnerable and to ignore the fears, to be courageous and to move forward down that path. My daughter was a little bit more straightforward. She and I have a close relationship. My ex-wife now and I share in caring for her and helping her live an independent life. Yeah, so with my daughter, it was much easier.
Mhm.
As you know, so it reminds me of something I use in coaching, which is the sort of eat the frog parable, where I think it was originally from Mark Twain. If one of your jobs each day is to eat a frog, start the day by eating the frog first, right? Don't dread it all day long. Do the hard thing first.
That's a great,
Um,
that's a great analogy.
it is, and I think Mark Twain goes on to say, if your job is to eat two frogs, eat the big frog first. um, and and so that's why after coming out to my wife, that's why my son was next, right? It's like, and once I ate that frog, it's like I could take that next step a lot more easily. An important element of my journey is really, and my therapy especially, but the Gamma guys certainly have followed this philosophy themselves as well, one step at a time, right? Come out, be okay with myself, come out to my wife, figure out what to do with my wife. I commuted to college, and so I lived at home with my parents, with my family. And then right from college, I got married. I had never lived alone in my entire life.
Hmm.
I was near 60, when I got my own apartment at however old I was, 58 years at the time. That was the first time I ever lived alone.
Wow.
So for me, it was, just a lot of one step at a time. First get good at this, and then get good at that, and then get good at that, right? After these first, big frogs that I had to eat, it was, the rest of it was a little bit easier to take each subsequent step.
I think you eat the bigger frog first, and the frog in your mind is bigger than the one you eat because you think it's a huge frog, and it really isn't. So, because people put this in their mind that, and I think that's where courage comes in. Eat the frog first, and the frog you eat will not be as big as your mind thinks it is. It'll always be smaller. And that's my take on it, you know.
And it might be, and even if it's not, when it's done, it's done,
Yeah.
right? You ate the frog. And so we get through it. Fear doesn't come true.